Hello and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Out with the old and in with the new. With the arrival of 2013, what can we expect? Will the global economy continue on its slow pace of recovery, or is there another crisis in the cards? Will Western powers and Israel finally decide to attack Iran? Will the world come together to deal with extreme weather? And will America see another horrific year of mass murders? To Crosstalk predictions for 2013, I'm joined by John Glaser in Washington. He's an assistant editor and blogger for antiwar.com. In San Francisco, we have Will Durst. He is a political comic and syndicated columnist. And in Paris, we cross to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. She is a journalist and political commentator. All right, Crosstalk rules in effect as usual. John, you're a foreign policy expert. Do you see in your crystal ball an attack on Iran this year?
I doubt it. We came very close, I think, in 2011 and 2012 to a war in Iran. The Israelis were pressuring Washington pretty hard for, first strike. But the Obama administration, as much as I have to criticize him for, really they engaged in a diplomatic offensive to reiterate to people that, number one, the intelligence says Iran is not producing nuclear weapons. They have no nuclear weapon program. And two, that a war on Iran would really be both ineffective and counterproductive, because unless we change the regime and have another war like Iraq and Afghanistan probably combined, that'll just motivate the Iranians to actually start building a bomb. And so I think that there's wide consensus that a war on Iran would be too costly and is not the right time right here. People like Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, highest military office in the country, he says this kind of thing. Many in the Obama administration have. Chuck Hagel, the presumptive nominee for Secretary of Defense for the Obama administration's second term, he's very weary of a war in Iran. So I think the tide is actually turning a little bit, and we'll have to see if it plays out that way. But what we're probably going to be faced with is what the Obama terms a dual track, which is diplomacy and harsh sanctions that primarily harm the Iranian people, not the government, and that's unfortunate.
Okay, that's like carrots and sticks there, I say. Will, if I go to you in San Francisco, will Obama be emboldened now? He's re-elected. He's technically a lame duck, okay? I mean, will he be more bold in his approach to domestic policy and foreign policy, in your opinion?
Well, at the second term, they always think of their legacy.
Right.
And the second term is where presidents in America constantly get in trouble, because they can't run for a third term. They're termed out. Boom, they got to set things up for who's ever going to run after them from their party, either Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton. But mostly he's focused on legacy, and that's why I think health care and maybe a lasting peace, bringing people home from Afghanistan, and also getting the economy in shape, because people are going to remember him afterwards the same way they remember Clinton, that Clinton were the boom years, and I think that's what he's going to try to get to.
Well, what about gun control?
He might try to do something on gun control, but nothing. The two parties are so solidified, the two sides, and the gun proponents, the people who own guns, are not going to budge a millimeter, not a .30-06, not even the length of a bullet. So it's going to be difficult. What he might be able to do as a compromise is to limit the size of magazines, and that could be seen as a victory, because right now you can 30-shot magazines, but if he could get it down to 10 or 20, he's going to try to find some victory there.
Okay, the insanity of American gun control. And Elizabeth, let's talk about another more optimistic topic, the Eurozone. What do you think is going to happen this year?
I think the Eurozone will keep it together, and I've always thought that because there was misunderstanding of the commitment of the Germans and the French and the Italians and the Spaniards, the core nations, to keeping the euro together. And the central bankers said what they said. The Germans do not like paying for quite a bit of the Greek and probably the Spanish debt, but they will do it. They have committed to it, and the European nations have, even though there have been protests and anger, they have committed to staying within the European construction, because they don't see how Europe can go back to being a series of atomized nations. So it's really a question of an economic decision that also is a political decision. I think it will be difficult to get European nations to move towards fiscal unity. It makes complete sense, because if you can play the budget of one country against another, you will have speculation and different lending rates for everyone. But I think the reason why you haven't heard about the Eurozone conflict these past weeks is that it is actually doing better. And if you look at the stock exchanges in the various European countries, Eurozone countries, you can see that they're shooting right up. There's also something that I always like to remind people, because they say, oh, the ratio of debt to GDP of France is like that of America or Britain. And this is absolutely not true, because if you look at what the debt ratio is for countries like France or even Italy or Spain, what you're talking about is something that is legally defined by the Maastricht Treaty, and it adds up national debt, regional debt, cities, municipalities, social obligation, pensions, everything. If you look at what the American debt is announced, it's only the federal debt. It doesn't take the states, it doesn't take the cities, it doesn't take the Medicare commitments, it doesn't take the pensions. And if you were to calculate it, rather than have something like around 100% of GDP, you'd be more looking at something that is about 220 of GDP. And so I will say that if you look at the fundamentals in European economies, they're not half as bad as you think, in the Eurozone especially. And so I would bet on the Eurozone. Okay, the Americans will keep printing money, I have no doubt about that. John, where do you think the Arab Spring is going to go this year? I have no doubt about it either. Okay. John, what do you think the Arab Spring is going to happen to it this year?
You know, it's tough to say. There are still a lot of things happening. You know, some people think there was a lull after Egypt and Tunisia, but there are still a lot of things happening. I mean, Jordan right now is facing a lot of domestic people are very upset with the government. They are vying for some sort of constitutional monarchy that is more that addresses more of their social concerns and doesn't, for example, torture people and have a police state, which is what they essentially have. Bahrain is still, you know, people are still fighting for freedom there. They're still out in the streets despite a ban on all demonstrations and protests, which the Bahraini government has imposed with American support. But, you know, we'll have to see. I think Yemen will continue to be a very disappointing area of the Arab Spring. You know, there was a lot of protests that tried to oust the previous president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and now this guy, Mansour Hadi, is in, and he has become such an immediate American puppet. With increased American aid and military assistance, basically a bribe so he can continue to secretly bomb his country with drones. So that's going to continue to disappoint. Bahrain, I think, is going to continue to disappoint because it's too geopolitically important to the Obama administration to allow any sort of semblance of democracy. But I think things will continue to move along, and we still have a lot to see with Egypt as well, which I might not have time to go into. Okay, Will, is Washington going to continue its gridlocked? I mean, Obama will be inaugurated soon. Are the Republicans just going to treat him the same way like during the first 4 years? It depends on how strong their base is and what John Boehner, Speaker of the House John Boehner, is able to, if he's able to wrangle some of the Tea Party guys, or some of the guys who are afraid of being Tea Partied, who are being run against in the primary. So I don't think
it's going to happen. I think the polarization is going to remain because these people have proven that they don't care about the sake of the country, that they believe in their principles, and we ask them what their principles are, and it's no taxes, close the borders, and women are baby tunnels for Christ. And these people have these ideas, and they can't compromise.
Anne-Elisabeth, would you react to what you just heard there? Is it that bad with the right in America?
Yes. I know quite a few people on the right in America, and including in the Tea Party, and they're not half as bad as that. And quite honestly, there's a wonderful book that was out last year, which is called "This Is No Angry Mob, That's My Mum." And I think if you try, I've lived in America, and I have been a correspondent for a French magazine in America for several years. And if you try traveling in what is known as flyover country, you know, red states, the bit in the middle that people do not go to, you meet the most extraordinary people, and as a French woman, I find them very close to what is being described by Tocqueville when he writes about America, democracy in America. And what they have is they have the sort of the market square democracy. You can agree or disagree with things, but these are basically sort of genuinely sort of nice and friendly people, and I think they are being caricatured by the people on either coast. I would totally disagree on this.
Well, I mean, we did have that legal rape comment and things like that. I mean, that does kind of characterize people. Go ahead, Will, real quick before we go to the break.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
I'm from that flyover country. I go back there a lot. And the people are wonderful. It's the people that they elect as their leaders that are not so wonderful.
All right, gentlemen and lady, we're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the new year. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about predictions for the new year 2013. Okay, Anne-Elisabeth, during the break you said you wanted to reply to me. Go right ahead, please.
Basically, I want to talk about this senator who said something extraordinarily stupid about the children of rape still having the right to live. But he didn't say that rape wasn't a horrible thing. What he said was that when you have life, life is sacred. Now, I'm not starting from his standpoint, but I will say one thing. I remember a few years back, two very good friends of mine looking at the echogram of their baby, and the baby was about 6 or 7 weeks, but it moved, and it was a living thing. So it made me think, and I'm absolutely pro-choice, but it made me think, you know, what gives me the right to decide that if I want this baby, it's a baby, and if I don't want it, it's a thing, and I can throw it away. And I would say that if you're a religious person, at the very least, it is something that you can discuss. And this senator said extremely clumsily, he said this is life and it ought to be respected, but he did try and say that rape was a horrible thing. He never said that it was legal.
Okay, I don't want to dwell on this. I want to dwell on the new year. John Glaser, I'd like you to tell me what you would like to see happen this year. What one good thing could happen? Because so much of what we do in news is depressing. Go ahead.
That's true. What we like to focus on is the bad stuff, so that's the stuff we want to improve. But I would definitely like to see more Americans pay attention to serious societal issues as opposed to the Super Bowl and apple pie and what's on television and so forth. I think that there's a lot that needs to be discussed and focused on and debated, and we have a sort of an ADD culture with what people are willing to pay attention to. On the other side of that, people are involved more than they have in past times, and so that's a good sign, but I think we need more of it. Also, I'd like to see a continuing disintegration of the mainstream media's grip on what people actually consume.
I'm all for that.
Media.
I like that.
I think the internet, yeah. The internet has sort of punctured that a bit, and you know, places like RT and others have done a good job of trying to puncture it as well.
Well, what would you like to see happen this year, okay? I mean, all of us would like to see unemployment go down, you know, just more prosperity for the average family.
More prosperity for that, and maybe some forward thinking, maybe some ideas of what's going to happen in the future, maybe lay a base, save up for a rainy day. America is going to have an explosion of elderly getting out of the workforce, getting into Social Security, getting into Medicare, and they got to prepare for that. The whole baby boomers every year. It started 3 years ago with the baby boomers reaching the age of 65, and it's going to happen for the next 15 years. And that huge demographic bulge, which they call the pig and the snake, because that's what it looks like, that's going to hit, and we actually have to start preparing for that. And I'm one of them, so I want to be prepared for it.
And Elizabeth, what would you like to see happen this year?
Well, what we know is that there's a whole block of countries that we're not talking about too often that have had consistently in the past 4 or 5 years 10%, 8%, 12% growth, and I'd like them to keep on growing and start teaching us things. And these are countries in Africa. And nobody's paying attention to the fact that Africa is mostly, and let's sort of put aside places like the Congo, but mostly it is becoming an economic success. I find this very encouraging. I find that lots of the African elites are extremely well educated, and I'd like sort of, you know, for us, for a change, to go and look at solutions in Africa and bring them to our depressed first world.
Okay. You know, John, I'm glad this was brought up. I mean, Africa is more and more on America's radar, particularly the military.
Yeah, there's some troubling trends, and although she's right, you know, there are a lot of cases in Africa where the countries are, you know, opening their borders to more trade. They're sort of have a more firm grounding of rule of law, and that's spurring some economic growth. These are good things, but the United States has you know, only recently in the past, I think 5 years, has the U.S. Imposed a domain, a Pentagon domain on Africa. Before, Africa was just left out in the water because it didn't matter much to anybody. But now that, you know, after Libya, there's been more Al-Qaeda, so-called Al-Qaeda activity, and however small this is and however localized it is, because it's not a direct threat to the United States, the United States has said, oh, we're going to get more involved. So we're involved in Mali, we're involved in Nigeria, we're involved in Uganda and sort of East African area, we're involved in Somalia. And these are all serious, dangerous trends that we're seeing, because most of it's done in secret. Most of it's done with sort of special ops and drones. The American people don't know about it, and it could end up very, very, very poorly for a lot of innocent people in Africa.
Well, sticking with foreign policy, Will, do you think China now is America's #1 enemy after what we saw in the election?
I don't know of enemy. I think
well, America always needs an enemy. America always has
perhaps
an enemy, okay? So is this the new one?
Well, yeah, we need something to leverage our enmity against, and it was Russia for a while, and then it was Japan. Remember the early '80s, a rising sun, and now it's well, then it was Iraq and Iran. And Saddam really helped, because Saddam he looked evil.
He was perfect,
he looked like a police sketch artist rendering of a child molester. Yeah, he was a perfect villain. And China is kind of faceless. It's an
really
amorphous
quick about
kind of.
China?
We know they're huge.
Yeah, go ahead, John. Jump in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this is really amazing to me, because the primary problem that the United States sees with China is that its economy is too strong and that it's building up its military. So these are two things that the United States prides itself on: a giant military and a big economy, right? What a big economy in China reflects is, number one, a lot of hundreds of thousands of people being lifted out of poverty inside China, but it also means help for the United States, because trade is obviously mutually beneficial, and so trade and international borders being a little more open to trade, this is a good thing. But the United States in Washington wants to paint it as a bad bad thing. They're playing a very sort of great game geopoliticking in Asia. And because China's having success, they're moving to try and contain China. So that means backing a lot of unscrupulous people in Asia-Pacific, surging military forces there, naval forces there. This is all very bad. It's an interesting way of the United States turning something positive into something very terrible. And it makes it easy for people to go, oh, China's our next greatest enemy.
Okay. Anne-Elisabeth, let's talk about
Are you sure?
Okay, Will, go ahead, jump in. Okay,
I completely disagree on this.
Okay, Anne-Elisabeth, go first. Go ahead.
I completely disagree on this. Several things. First of all, the strange, mysterious people, strange people that America is helping in the Asia-Pacific are basically the Japanese and Taiwan, who are, well known. And there's this sort of threat of the Chinese military to occupy some islands and start a war with Japan, which is not something that anybody needs. Second, I would be less optimistic about the fate of China than you seem to be, because China in itself has got massive problems. It has just tipped the scales where you have more people now living in the cities in China than living in the countryside. It's got, it's beginning to have problems of workforce in some places. It's got huge, massive corruption. You've got Hu Jintao, who just left the presidency of the country, who left with $2.7 billion, which he acquired God knows how. And you've got dynasties in various regional places, which are, held by the Communist Party, of people who are making huge fortunes at that level for their own families. So what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that the growth of China is still going to go on like that. And I also, the ruling party in China has got the major problem that they do not know how to take a decision. So they bounce back a decision from local to regional to national level, and something, it's the answer, no answer is lobbed back to them. And the whole country is sort of teetering happily with the proceeds from foreign trade. And they know perfectly well that if the economies in the West go durably down, there's going to be less trade, and already the growth figures have been going slightly down from a very high point. So I'm not saying that, first of all, China is in such good shape, and second, I'm not saying that it's that.
Go ahead, John,
either.
Go ahead. Then we go to Will. Go ahead, John.
If this were a show about how, criticizing China, I'd have a lot to say. China does have corruption that you talk about. They have a lot of domestic repression that's very unhealthy. There's a lot to criticize, and there's a lot to say that China's growth is on too high of a slope and it'll go down soon. That's probably true. But this doesn't justify building up military interventionism in the region. And, when I was talking about supporting unscrupulous leaders in the Asia-Pacific, how about the Philippines? How about the Philippines? We just secured a deal, the Obama administration did, for increasing the U.S. military presence in the Philippines. We have a long, unfortunate colonial-type history in the Philippines, but right now the president, President
they have
Aquino,
democratic elections in the Philippines.
has been. Yes, but they also have serious repression and torture, and the U.S.-supported security forces
far less than they used to, and I'm talking from experience here.
Okay, Will, I want you to jump in. We're almost out of time.
Yes, but
come on, Will, jump in.
The only thing good about China is that a lot of people are buying iPhones and Buicks, and that's good for America. And as long as we can keep that pipeline going one way, or a major point one way, everybody will be happy.
Anne-Elisabeth, I'm going to give you the last word on the program. Is this going to be a good year for Europe?
Well, it can hardly be as bad a year as last year. So if we stick it together, and if the British can be convinced not to leave altogether, because that's one of the really crazy things that they're capable of doing, I think we'll scrape through.
Okay, we've run on a positive note here. Let's see how the year runs through. Many thanks today to my guests in Washington, San Francisco, and in Paris. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.